And we greet you on this weekend from our Scripps News Bureau in New York City. I'm Joe St. George. It was in this city this week that something happened impacting the race for president that has never happened before in this country. A former president, a person who could be president again, has been convicted of a crime. Late Thursday, a Manhattan jury issued its verdict in the Trump hush money trial, finding former President Trump guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records. As we mentioned, that makes Mr. Trump the lone former chief executive to receive a criminal conviction, another first that 2024 has brought us. This race has already divided the nation on a variety of issues, and you can add this verdict to a long list of dividing issues. So where do we go from here? Will this historic verdict even be on voters' minds come this fall? Let's discuss with our all-star panel. Time for another conversation with our partners at Politico. It's time for our Inside the Race panel. From Politico, we welcome back Washington and White House reporter Daniel Lippman. Our Scripps News team assembled as well to recap this historic week. White House reporter Haley Bull at her perch on the North Lawn, congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed, political analyst Steve Schmidt. Steve's also the founder of The Warning, a newsletter and podcast on Substack. Daniel, is this guilty verdict, now that we've had some time to process it a bit, is it playing out politically just as we suspected thus far? I mean, you aren't expecting a shock poll to come out showing President Biden up 10, are you?
No, I think it's going to take a while for it to have an impact as people process this verdict, as people await sentencing on July 11th, as they weigh this verdict versus other issues that they are facing and both candidates' characters and how they think that they could do for the next 4 years of this country. And so I think there is some worry in Trump's campaign that he could lose some of those new Trump voters, those young people, those minorities who were kind of soft Trump supporters. And polls say that they are at risk of defecting given this conviction.
Steve, it's been a historic week. But before I get your take on where this campaign goes from here, I want to play some reaction that voters in Maricopa County, Arizona had to this verdict when it came down. Our team in Phoenix were able to grab this, again, just hours after the historic verdict was read late on Thursday. Take a listen.
Hearing it from you was definitely, wow.
Everyone was texting my phone.
Guilty, I mean, no one wants to be found guilty. That's hard for anybody.
It's crazy and unfortunate, and we're going to see where we go from here.
Do you think it changes how you'll vote in November?
Probably, yeah.
You were planning on voting for him before?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah,
this does not change anything.
No, I can't say that I would vote for Trump.
The Trump supporters are kind of like strict on like Trump, so like I feel like they won't necessarily change.
I didn't think it was going to be all 34 of them. To think that he's still eligible to run for presidency, again, that's kind of even more wild.
I don't even know his case. I know it's that he paid somebody some hush money or something like that. It's none of my concern.
I love having our panel from Washington, but I also love hearing from real Americans. Steve, your thoughts there?
I think that you have to be where the ball is going to be to understand what this moment is. And we've already moved beyond the immediate reaction to the verdict. What matters in this moment is the explosion of calls for retribution, for revenge, for violence across the internet from very prominent people associated with the MAGA movement. So there's a really fundamental question. Imagining a world where Donald Trump was acquitted yesterday, would there have been reciprocal calls for violence to lock up your political opponents? And the answer to that question is the fundamental question that's on the ballot 158 days from now. When you begin a cycle of revenge and retribution, history teaches us it is very difficult to stop. Where do you pull out of that spin? And so what Donald Trump has done is not talk about today at his news conference plans for the future. He's justified his actions with a revisionist spin while all across the country, the most senior elected officials of the Republican Party are out in force attacking the judicial system with the same equal fervor with which they have attacked the election process.
Haley, Bull, want to get over to you. President Biden has a very unique choice to make here, doesn't he? How much does he want to play up this conviction? What is your reporting telling you? Open your reporter's notebook if you can.
Well, Joe, the campaign's response in the immediate aftermath of the verdict really sets the tone, and that message is pointing voters to the polls. The campaign's communications director saying the only way to keep Trump out of the Oval Office is the ballot box, going on to say, convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee. And that statement, you'll note, is not overly celebratory, but to a degree continues a familiar message we have seen from the Biden-Harris campaign, talking about what they view as the threat Trump poses to democracy, in their opinion. Now, the campaign certainly fundraising in the aftermath of this verdict, seeming to acknowledge in those appeals that this could be a galvanizing force for Trump's supporters in their own fundraising efforts. And we've talked to several Democratic strategists, one telling us they don't expect this to create a dramatic shift in the polls, but others also acknowledge that this is a very tight race, and they do think this verdict cost Trump. But the question will be to what degree the campaign leans into this verdict going forward.
Nate, you keep the pulse of Capitol Hill for us at Scripps News. That's your beat. The guilty verdict, it hasn't changed the dynamics at all politically here. I'm curious, though, do you see what Steve was alluding to, this revenge, taking a form of investigating the district attorney's office, holding Alvin Bragg accountable now that this verdict has come in? What's your reporting suggest?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on Friday, the House Committee Against Weaponization of the Federal Government, which is something that's being run by Chairman Jim Jordan, who also chairs the House Judiciary Committee, announced that they're trying to bring Alvin Bragg in for testimony. Not clear if that's actually going to happen. He's, of course, the Manhattan District Attorney who pursued these charges. But again, in terms of dynamics on Capitol Hill, you know, this thing pretty much fell exactly where you thought it would go. This, you know, Democrats said we need to respect the rule of law here. Republicans said this is a travesty of justice. We expect President Trump to win on appeal and furthermore win in the voting booths once that happens in the November election. So really, this kind of fell exactly where you thought it would. What I want to point out here, though, is some of the reaction that we saw from various senators. Now, remember, there's a number of vulnerable Senate Democratic incumbents who are running for re-election. Everyone from John Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio. You've also got Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. None of those three had immediately spoken out immediately in the wake of Trump's sentencing. Remember, they might be reliant on voters to go to the polling booths in November, select former President Trump at the top of the ticket, go a little bit further down to Senate and say, oh, you know, I'm going to vote for a Democrat for Senate. So ultimately, whether that was a conscious strategy to not alienate some of their potential voters who might be voting for former President Trump, that's not exactly clear. But again, it's very conscious when you look at some of these races and look at who's reacted, who hasn't reacted in the immediate aftermath of this verdict. None of those three Democratic incumbents, who are all vulnerable, all in states that could very well be won by former President Trump. It's far enough to say that it's likely that former President Trump wins Montana, for example. It's very possibly wins Ohio, and, you know, Pennsylvania is probably the biggest question mark there. None of them had reacted strongly. That, of course, indicative of the fact they might be reliant on Trump voters to win another 6-year term in the U.S. Senate.
Daniel, I got about 30 seconds left, but we still have the possibility of another Trump trial. It's probably a slim chance, but the possibility of another Trump trial before the election. Any read that those cases, those trials, would impact politics a bit more than this Manhattan verdict?
Well, it's too early to tell. It does seem pretty unlikely, as you mentioned. Democrats had thought that we would see 3 to 4 trials this year, but Trump has really benefited from all those delays, especially in Florida for the classified documents case with Judge Eileen Cannon. And so voters can know if he's guilty or not.
Well, that's all the time we have. Obviously, much more discussion on the impact of this verdict. We'll be following this every step of the way. I know Daniel and all the good reporters, all the great journalists at Politico will as well. Thank you all for your time. We'll see you a little bit later in the program. Coming up on the